This is specifically geared at getting undocumented students into college, and then once they're in college, getting them to be successful, to graduate, and to have a future, a bright future. So I'll go ahead and get started. Just a little bit about what I'm going to talk about is the characteristics of these students. As Denzel said, we're going to preview just the first 5.5 minutes of a film that I worked on called Living Undocumented, High School, College, and Beyond. And that's going to be available. It's fully available online. And then when students do get into college, I do want to talk about things such as tuition, support systems, and suggestions for helping them finish, because we know that first, getting students into college is a challenge, but getting them to finish is also a challenge. The dropout rate in college is very high, and that's something actually people don't talk about very often. And then I'm going to share additional resources with you, because this is certainly not enough time for this important topic. So numbers, we often talk about numbers, right? So we know that there is 11.7 million undocumented immigrants in this country, more or less. We know that there's over 1 million students who are under 18 without papers living here. And we know that approximately 65,000 graduate every year. That's very low. And we know a lot of them either drop out because they don't see the point of graduating, or we have students that never actually drop in, right? They come here to work, for example, especially young males. And then when we look at the college graduation rate, the student or college even going rate, it's 7,000 to 13,000. So there's a huge disconnect there. Is it that these students are not prepared to go to college? I don't think so. I think it's their status that prevents them from being in college, for paying for college, and for, completing college. So beyond the numbers, these students, there are struggles, obviously, with being undocumented. So first is you're struggling with your own identity and your sense of belonging. So for a lot of students, some of them grow up knowing that they're undocumented, but for some, it's a reality that hits them in the face, and they thought they were just like everyone else. And all of a sudden, society puts this label on them. And often the label is not undocumented or unauthorized. It's the I word, right? It's illegal. So what does that mean, that I'm all of a sudden an illegal person? So depression often sets in, knowing that students cannot maybe achieve the goals and their goals and dreams in the ways they originally had hoped. And there's a lot of discrimination beyond, the racial discrimination in this country. Now it's another stigma that they have to deal with. So that's a real challenge, a struggle. The economic challenges, right? We know a lot of undocumented immigrants make very little, often live below the minimum wage. A lot of times these students have to support their families. So in addition to going to school, they're working multiple jobs, helping to support their families. And if they're in college, often trying to pay for their own education out of their own pockets, which, is a huge challenge. There's limited access that they have to legal services, and I would say quality legal services, because we know there's a lot of really sketchy legal services out there to take advantage of these people. Some people have difficulty having access to medical care and psychosocial support too, right? And finally, there's just a lot of safety stressors with living with this stigma, with this label. And so being stopped by authorities, right? In the film Living Undocumented, you're going to see a young kid who's in high school, and he talked about they were drinking and they were some cops stopped them. So for high school kids, well, that's unfortunate, but it's not the end of the world. But for him, he could have been deported, right? So there's always this fear, but you could just be stopped for no reason, right? We know there's a hyper policing of brown and Black bodies in this country. And there's always the fear of deportation. So there's a lot of struggles that these students deal with. In addition to the struggles, though, these are amazing students that have strengths that I want to highlight as well. They have transnational sensibilities. So some of them remember being born and coming to this country, and others don't. But they still cross borders in virtual ways through their families, through their ties and their networks. Some of them are bilingual, and many of them are bilingual, and some are even biliterate, which is a huge resource for this country, right? We're kind of a country that's in a sick way kind of proud to be monolingual. And here are these students that have this bilingualism and biliteracy. And for me, that's something extra special, because I teach in the program of bilingual education, where we always have shortages of bilingual teachers. They have an understanding of the political system in ways that many adults don't, for example. They're aware of local, national, and international migration policies. I recently came back from Mexico, where I was studying children who are back in Mexico or living there for the first time, kind of this reverse migration. And this little 9-year-old whose dad is still here wrote, "I wish the US government would help me see my dad." Right? So these kids understand how these policies impact people in the most human way that many American citizens may not. They are activists, right? This whole DACA and, you know, the movement of the DREAM Act and everything else, although it still hasn't passed, this is because of these young people, and they have taken their voices and made themselves heard in spite of not being able to vote. And they persevere in the face of challenges. I always say that the students that are in my college or in college are really the exception. And we often, you know, we have to focus on the kids that are not in college sometimes. And that's hard because we don't have them in one place. But there's so many strengths that these students have, and how do we capitalize on that as educators and as a country? So to get the stories, because I think ultimately it's not about labels, it's not about numbers, it's about stories. So to share the stories of what it means to be undocumented in this country, I worked with a team to create a film. So if any of you have been to New York City, this is actually our campus. It's the City College of New York. We're in Harlem. These are the cool buildings. Like this one kind of looks like a Harry Potter castle. And we created this film. It's a short film for all educators to use with their students, regardless of their status, because first of all, you don't know their status and you can't ask. So everyone would get to know what it means to be undocumented. And then what we did was we created a lesson plan to prepare students to watch it. So I want to just share with you the plan. It starts with looking at signs, right? So the first 2 signs are signs most students are familiar with. But the third sign, the caution sign, is a sign that students who live in the border states may know, but not so much in New York or in, you know, northern states. And this is a sign that was created a long time ago, I believe in the 80s, when people were crossing the border and they weren't familiar with freeways, and they were just running from Migra. And when they were running, they would cross these highways, and often they would, unfortunately, very unfortunately, be killed, right, by cars. So it was a sign for cars to look out for these people crossing, trying to, you know, run for their lives. But then it became used as a symbol. And what's interesting about this sign is it became used as a symbol for immigration and against immigration as well. So that's how we start the conversation. And then we have students build on their prior knowledge with an anticipatory guide. So this one is in Spanish. We have it in English as well, but I just wanted to, you know, bring the bilingualism here as well. So we have 6 statements that, for example, the first one is the majority of undocumented immigrants are Latino. The second one is the labels illegal and undocumented have almost the same significance and impact. Then, antes del video, before the video, we have the students agree or disagree with the statement and give their personal reason. And then, después del video, after the film, they once again agree or disagree, but with the evidence from the film, which, you know, if you're a teacher, Common Core is all about evidence-based. So we try to, you know, bring that in as well. And film is a text as well. So we have the students do this, and then we prepare them. So they're already thinking about these issues, and then they watch the film. So what we're going to do now is just show you the first kind of 5.5 minutes of the film to give you a taste of it. And then I encourage you, and I hope that you'll watch the rest and possibly even consider using it with your classes. So we'll go ahead and start the film right now.
When I share my status, people are really surprised, even among other undocumented immigrants. When I tell, for example, coworkers who are undocumented as well, oh, I came when I was 5 months old, they're in shock because I speak English well, or because I went to college, and so forth. And they're just in disbelief. And so, of course, I try to explain to them, well, I came when I was 5 months old, and they're like, oh, you were practically born here. Practically, you know, but that makes a huge difference. You know, those 5 months make all the difference in my life.
I am an African, I am a Malian, a Muslim, and I am a woman.
I would consider myself a very whitewashed Mexican because I am very proud of being Mexican, At the same time, I'm very Americanized, and my values are pretty American.
Well, you know, on the cover of Time magazine, here I am, right there. That's right there. And I remember being at this photo shoot, and we all had to say, you know, what was our identity. And some of us said, oh, you know, I'm South Korean. And I remember just thinking, you know, I'm undocumented American. And, you know, this cover says that kind of, I mean, this cover does say that. We are Americans.
Sometimes I consider myself American, but because the country keeps denying me of that right, fully, completely, I am back to not being from here, not being fully Mexican because I'm not there. I don't share a lot of the, you know, things that I'm missing out in back home. So I guess that sometimes I just feel like I'm in that gray area of not knowing what to call myself, but just knowing that I belong. I feel that I belong here.
It all began with my father coming here when I was about 3. Then my mother, my brother and I decided to cross the border. Well, my parents decided for us, and my mother found a coyote to smuggle us past the border into the U.S. To me, it was an adventure. Walking through, we crossed to Tijuana. So walking through the valley was like an adventure. Spending a night there was an adventure. We weren't supposed to spend the night there, but because the coyote fell asleep, we missed a ride. So we ended up spending an entire day there. But to me, it was like child's play. Now I look back and I was thinking, I was like, it must have been terribly alarming and like nerve-wracking for my mom to be there with her 2 kids and then some strange man and not know what was going on.
When my mother, my sister, and I crossed, we were in a car. And from what I have been told, we were supposed to be really quiet. Unfortunately, I did not stop crying, but we made it. And so from California or so, we were then transported to New York and reunited with my father.
For some reason, my entire family decided to move to New York. I never really understood why so far and so cold. My dad moved here first. He moved, I think, like 4 years before us to like come here and make money and stuff. And then my mom decided that we should all be together, so we all moved over.
My family moved to the United States in 1981, so I was about a year old. And they came on student visas, and after about 4 years, those visas expired. And you know, me and my brother were still here. And so by the time I was 5, I became undocumented.
It wasn't until I reached high school or so that I realized that my status was going to hinder me from reaching my goals and my future pretty much, because I wanted to go to college, and because of my immigration status, I was not able to pursue those things like the rest of my peers.
I had went to Stuyvesant High School, and when I was a junior, I wanted to do this possible residency program. And so I had gone to the hospital, and the hospital wanted my green card for some sort of reason, and I was like, okay, you know what, I'll just go home and get it. And so I went back to my parents' grocery store, and I asked my mom, I was like, where's my green card? And then she says, it's at the house. You know, so I went back home to find this mythical, magical green card, right? And of course, I could never find it after searching. And so I called her back and I said, where is it? And she says, well, Joma, you don't have one, and you can't tell anybody about this either. And I was like, what are you talking about?
Usually I don't talk about it. Like, I am shy and ashamed of myself, so I don't talk about it to anybody.
Okay, so I think you can hear me again, and we're going to bring the PowerPoint up. So it was interesting to read your comments. I'm glad some of you think this is a film you can use with your students in your classes and your professional development. And the coyote piece is a very important one too, how problematic they are and how tragic the outcomes can be, because ultimately immigration is a business, and these coyotes are in this for the money, and it's not about the people or caring for the people. So again, this film and the resource guide is available on our website, livingundocumented.com. We have 2 versions with Spanish subtitles and one without. And there's also scholarship resources as well. So I encourage you to take a look and use whatever works for you. It's just an 18-minute film, so we created it so it can be used even in one high school or secondary school period as well. But we use it in college also. So some of the something I want to show you is some of the responses we got from students after showing the film. So some of the things they learned were, it's okay to talk about your status. Also, it's hard for undocumented immigrants to be successful, but not impossible. Illegal and undocumented has a very different meaning and impact because illegal is not right. So one of the things we talk about in the film is the I word and the power of that word. Immigration has more to do with it than people think, so how complex it is. And that even though you aren't part of something, you should never look back. Just keep moving forward. Never give up, because one day you'll be a part of it. So the students, in spite of the challenges, they still see that we have to have hope and we have to keep moving forward. And then they ask some really interesting questions, like how can you handle the discrimination against undocumented immigrants? Wow, what a big question, right? If you were born here and lived for 2 years and left for 12 years to another country, do I an immigrant? So just like, is just being born somewhere enough? Like, does that make to be a citizen? And then what makes you an immigrant? So really breaking down what these terms mean. When will the DREAM Act be approved? Why are they called alien minors? Isn't that kind of offensive? So I agree. In the film, we talk about the DREAM Act. We also talk about DACA and comprehensive immigration reform, what that would mean for so many people in this country. And then a question that I thought was very interesting that they asked us was, why do you guys care so much that you're making books and films? So to me, I took that as, well, this is not perceived as an issue for white people, right? Like, so why are white people doing this kind of work? And I think we have to see this, that we're all in this together. This is an American issue, as Jungmin said, and immigration has been perceived, especially undocumented immigrants, as Mexican, non-English speaking, and surely that's a part of who our undocumented immigrants are, but it's very narrow. So now I want to look at what happens, hopefully, when these students apply for college. Well, in the public universities, it's a state-by-state situation. So the states determine whether these students can be admitted, if they pay in-state tuition, and if any of you have seen what out-of-state tuition looks like or international student tuition looks like, it's like 3 to 5 times as much sometimes, and if they qualify for state financial aid. And then private universities, it's a whole other landscape. And they basically decide whether these students can be admitted and if they can get scholarships. So right now, and this is like always in flux, but right now there are 19 states where you can pay in-state tuition if you're undocumented. And this is great. However, it's still, for many of these students, they still have to pay out of their pockets. So that's part of it. The other part of it is these are the states with the largest number of undocumented immigrants. But as we know, undocumented immigrants are in every state in our country, so it's nowhere near enough. And then once students do get in college, there's advising considerations to be taken. For example, many of my students at the undergrad level, they pay a flat rate. So maybe they'll take 18 credits. And if you can think back to your college going experiences, 18 credits is insane because they also work to support their families. Or they just pay for course by course, and it may take them 8 years to finish. So being understanding and supportive of these realities. Having college counselors that can provide them support because they're going through things in a different way. Being aware of larger policies is really important. For example, when DACA, knowing what DACA is and how that will impact our undocumented students, or DAPA, which didn't pass. And then also providing referrals. So getting them, if they haven't applied for DACA and they qualify, getting them pro bono help, looking for nonprofit organizations that won't take advantage of them, or counseling centers. So how can we support students in our advising sessions? Also, in terms of long-term planning for our students, thinking about careers they go into. For example, in New York State, now you can become a certified teacher with DACA. But if you don't have DACA, you can't. However, with DACA, you still can't become a doctor. So knowing which fields are and aren't welcoming, or, but also thinking that this may change in the future. So knowing that, for students that have DACA now that are teaching, they didn't know this was going to be a possibility. So it's a very tight, tricky kind of road to maneuver. Also internships. We all know how important internships are, right? So for students with DACA, they can get paid internships because they have social security numbers. For others, they may not be able to be paid, but think about the networking opportunities and all these other things that may come. So really still supporting them in terms of internships is important. At the college level, it should be clear to them that undocumented students can or cannot go to your college, right? They shouldn't have to go around asking 100 people. It's not comfortable to do that. In financial aid, it should make it clear which scholarships are for undocumented students and which aren't. Also, many times undocumented immigrants are charged international student rates when they should be charged in-state rates, and that should be schools should be very vigilant of that. ID offices. This is the first place students go to get their official college ID. So if they don't have a valid state ID, which many of them may not have, and they present like a Mexican passport, for example, they should not be treated poorly because of that. They shouldn't be asked, well, why don't you have a valid stamp? Right. So training these people that work in these offices to be aware of this. They may need to change their ID numbers if they now have DACA and have a new working social. And we need to inform all people at the college. So that goes from faculty to staff to everyone else. So having sessions, posters, panels, those are all ways to do that. At our school, we have a dream team. So this is us after we premiered one of our films. And what dream teams do are their clubs. They started mostly on college campuses, but now high schools have them too. So I think that's wonderful. And they're safe space for undocumented students and their allies as well. So this is where they can come together to just share their stories and share resources. Also to do outreach, to do panels and things like that. So for some of our students, before they came to the dream team, they kind of had this feeling, well, I know I'm not the only one, but why do I feel so alone? And it's a really special place for them to come together. So if you don't have a dream team at your school, I suggest you give it some serious thought. This is a really great document. I just have 2 minutes, so I'm not going to go over it, but this is what not to and what to say to your undocumented students. So going to college really isn't an option is definitely something you should not say. But let's look at the state policies here and what can you do and what opportunities are there, and knowing that this won't be easy, but it's not impossible, for example, is one thing we should be careful in what we say. So I believe you're going to have access to this resource. So it's really important that you say the wrong thing to people. It may seem small at the moment and you will forget about it, but they won't. It stays with them. So there's lots of wonderful organizations to reach out to as well. There's a plethora of books about this topic. They're academic books. The book on the right is my book about immigration that I wrote for youth dealing with current issues, because I often say that while Ellis Island, and I'm in New York City, we have to go beyond Ellis Island. Our students' immigration realities are pressing, and we can't just keep it in the history. We have to bring it to the present and connect the two. There's a lot of really wonderful films out there. Angie Rivera's No Le Digas a Nadia is one of them, that she talks about her own immigration story and also dealing with sexual abuse and how she changed her status in a very tragic way. The Dream Is Now was actually funded by Steve Jobs' wife, and documented Jose Antonio Vargas' film. And it actually aired on CNN, which is great that this is getting an audience that's so out there, a mainstream audience. And finally, as I mentioned before, I've been doing work in Mexico with children and youth that were either born or raised here and are now back in Mexico because their parents made a decision to return because being undocumented was so difficult here. So we have it's another film. It's a half-hour film. It's on this website called unavidadefilm.com. And we're going to have a bilingual curriculum, a whole unit plan that I'm still working on, but hopefully should be up within a month. So I hope you can check that out as well. And I thank you for your comments. I'm going to read them later because I wasn't able to while I was talking.